Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Maverick Mind. A pleasure to be here with you all as always. This week, I am joined by spoken word poet and confidence coach, Tricia Veldman. She is somebody whose work is shaped by creativity, courage, and a very real relationship with what it means to be fully alive. Tricia has spent the last 10 years helping people find their voice through coaching them to be better at public speaking. And somewhere along that journey, she found her own voice too, except through poetry. A few years ago, her mum was put in a hospice at age 65. And that experience kind of changed everything. Her relationship with time, fear, creativity, and the way she shows up in the world. It's also what inspired her TEDx talk and many of the poems that she writes and performs today. This conversation, we get into the messier, the more human side of confidence, the part that no one really talks about, the wobbly bit, the doubt, the visibility hangover, the urge to wait until you're fully ready. And we talk about how spoken word unexpectedly became the place that Tricia processed grief, found play again, and rebuilt her identity as an artist. We explore her shift from being a speech coach to coaching confidence more broadly, the weirdness of promoting your own work, which you'll all resonate with 100%, what it feels like when your art no longer belongs just to you, and the small everyday practices that helped her move from holding back to fully expressing herself. So Tricia, a huge welcome to Maverick Mind. Hey Tricia, such a pleasure to have you on Maverick Mind. A massive warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I've right before we joined each other on this call, and before we started recording and stuff, I was binge watching your TED talk.
Oh,
um, so I'd love to kind of maybe start there because I think that you kind of approached that your approach to that talk kind of alluded me anyway, whether it's changed since then, because I was a couple of years ago, kind of alluded me to your approach to now your work as a poet and with confidence and coaching. And that was kind of like this idea of, oh, actually, I'll get you explain it. You go into
okay.
kind of the vibe of that talk.
Yeah, so it's all about the way that we relate to our experience of life. And so if you haven't watched the talk, I was inspired by watching my mother, who has been on hospice for now 2 years, but at the time of doing the TEDx, which was in 2023, she had been given a prognosis of quote unquote a few months to live. And being very close to her and having that sudden shock really kind of helped me put life into perspective. And so I broke it down into life is short, life is long, and life is messy. And the way that that's really impacted me is I feel like it's easy for people to say, oh, just do the thing that scares you because life is short. And that is really important. It's go for it. And at the same time, life is long and there will be consequences to all of our decisions. And so if we're constantly doing the thing that we know isn't good for us because who cares? Life is short, take a risk. Sometimes that's great. And we need to think about our future selves. And then the life is messy is really because we're not going to get it right all the time. And there's so much pressure that comes with a timestamp on someone's life and feeling like every moment has to be perfect. We have to make the most of every single moment in our entire lives. That's a lot of pressure. And so just acknowledging that we're not going to get it right all the time. And there are going to be days that are off or bad. And that's important too. That's actually part of the process.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that I wrote down actually one thing that you said, well, a couple of things that you said in it. And one of the lines that kind of really got me was life is too long to be careless. And
Mm,
I really loved that. And you were kind of saying like to have a future self is a real privilege.
mhm,
And so kind of not live for that future self, live for like now, but at the same time, you're here to do what that future self kind of can achieve, right?
mhm. Exactly. And that's the whole point of the life is too long to be careless piece is, again, to counteract that feeling of, oh, life's short, who cares? We're all going to die. Because sometimes I can get in myself in that kind of apathetic state of whatever, nothing matters, we're all going to die anyway. But looking at my mom, for example, and as she reflects on her life and has regrets about things she never did or things she would have done differently, it is really important that we consider how the actions we're taking today will influence the rest of our lives because they will. And that doesn't mean we have to sacrifice our peace or contentment in the moment, but just knowing that we're aligning our day-to-day actions with what we want from the future, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of like what you were saying, I think it must have been during the poem that you said it at the end. I won't ruin it for everyone because you should go and watch it. Um, but you kind of said that the vibe that I got was sometimes you'll be given a terminal diagnosis like your mum got.
Mhm.
Um, but then you still don't know after that. And there's a line in that poem that was something like, I'm not going to sit and mourn what hasn't happened yet. I'm
Mm,
going to
mhm.
be with a whole heart now, or something like that. And that really got me because I guess maybe it's because of personal experiences of mine. Two actually. One was my dad was given that diagnosis, which
Mhm.
actually did actually come true. He was diagnosed with cancer. The listeners that have been with me for a long time know the story. Was diagnosed with cancer and then he ended up dying 3 weeks later. But my
Mhm.
grandmother had multiple sclerosis and she was told that she had a month to live and ended up living 45 years
Oh,
after that.
wow.
um, and she outlived all of her doctors, actually, that gave her those prognoses over time. And she
Wow.
really had this kind of uh, probably sometimes edging on irresponsible zest for life that
Oh,
she would make like stupid purchases instead of paying her electricity bill. She would, sometimes be a little bit reckless, but she just really had this idea of like, well, for me it could happen in any moment, but at the same time it could happen for anyone at any moment, really. So why are we not all living like that, right?
yeah. Exactly. And that's where there's a privilege to have a future self piece also comes into play because sometimes, yes, do the irresponsible thing, buy the thing. My mom does stuff like that all the time now. And because she's continued living, it's like, oh, wait, it can't be so reckless to the point of your own self-detriment, but do the thing that maybe feels irresponsible in the moment, but brings you joy or gives you pleasure. And that I think there's some wiggle room for that. But what you first commented on was a huge revelation for me, which was when I realized it's not healthy to mourn something that hasn't happened yet. And so when given the prognosis, it was like we were all planning the funeral, preparing for the worst to happen. And then my mom at one point got really upset and she's like, don't put me in the grave yet. Like I'm still here. And so those times when I would find myself visualizing the funeral or imagining what the future will hold, I had to eventually I just realized like this is not healthy and we can't grieve something that hasn't happened yet. Why are we doing that? Because really, like your grandmother, we have no idea when it'll happen and doctors are wrong all the time and we can use that to help influence the way that we live and it, all we have is right now. So we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd kind of love to know if that was that kind of the catalyst to going down the route of guiding people to find their confidence. Because I remember the reason I say that is because I remember this was long before any of like my when my father died, or it was may have been around the time my grandmother actually did die in the end. Um, but I remember I was quite shy when I was a teenager, and I remember seeing something. I can't remember what it was, but it was like it was on TV, and it was about a girl that was quite shy, and then somebody else in the scene, whatever it was, a TV show of some kind. I can't remember exactly what. They said, how much of your life are you wasting by being shy? And I remember
Mm,
thinking, like, that's really true, actually, because I was very introverted. I would say I was always in my own world, like as a lot of creatives are, but
mhm,
then maybe a little bit fearful in social situations sometimes. And I remember thinking, like, wow, that's really true. How much are we wasting by just holding ourselves back out of fear? If you're doing that because it's just who you are, then fine. But if you're doing it out of fear, how much are
mhm.
you actually wasting?
So much. And that was a huge realization for me too, something similar to what happened to you. And so I had already been in the coaching space. I'd been teaching public speaking for probably 6 or 7 years before my mom had that diagnosis. But even before she had the official prognosis, she had been sick for a while. And there were times when I would be on a Zoom call with a client and they were saying, like, oh, I'm so nervous because I have to speak in front of 12 people tomorrow, and just acting like it was the end of the world, which is totally fair. Public speaking is a fear for a reason. There's a reason I teach that. And in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just found out, like, I just got a photo from my parents of the gravesite where my mom will be buried. And like, I was just, little things like that would happen. And then I'd have these conversations with people, and it made me just put everything into perspective. No one's going to die because you're a little nervous. No one's going to die if you say something awkward at the party. And it really just kind of slaps everything. It's like a slap in the face and puts reality in check. Not to say that those concerns aren't legitimate or valid, but a lot of times when we're shy, it's because we're so terrified of the outcome. We're so terrified of embarrassing ourselves. We're so terrified of things that in the long run aren't going to matter. And so, to your point, yeah, we're kind of wasting a lot of our life by indulging in those fears when really, at the end of the day, we are all going to die. And those things, those little moments of embarrassment aren't going to matter so much. The things that will matter are we living in alignment with what we know we can be? And usually, if we're holding ourselves back because we're shy or we're embarrassed or we're introverted, which being introverted is not a bad thing, but if we feel like it's limiting us in some way, then it's always worth putting things into perspective, even if that means indulging in some discomfort of putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, but remembering that it's not life or death, and it's really going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to know what came first for you. Was it the poetry or the public speaking coaching that you were doing?
So I have been coaching public speaking since 2016, and I only started writing poetry around the time of my mom's prognosis, actually. So that was in 2023. I very serendipitously went to a poetry review. It was a Friday night. I had no plans. I was just getting over a sickness, and I saw this event at the Savannah Cultural Arts Center, which is where I was living at the time. And it was a bunch of poets just sharing their work. And the whole way home, I started writing poetry. And then every day since then, I kept writing poetry. And then because of this mentality that I'd adapted of, who cares? Just do it anyway. Like, we're not going to die from this. Just have fun. I started sharing those poems as spoken word pieces on Instagram and YouTube, which is something that I, like you, was very introverted, very shy. I never thought I would have the courage to do anything like what I'm doing now. I never thought I'd have the courage to teach public speaking. And of course, that public speaking training helped me a lot when I got to this point. But there's a very big difference between coaching someone one-on-one on how to public speak and actually doing it yourself. And so I was kind of like the coach that tells people what to do but doesn't actually play the game. And then eventually it came to the point where, okay, I'm ready to do this for myself and put myself out there. And so, yeah, so I've been doing the spoken word and poetry, and I recently published a poetry book, all of that since 2023.
Wow. So that's really interesting that everything with your mom kind of triggered that feeling in you. Had you written poems like earlier in your life, or was it just something that came?
I've always been a writer, like I've always just enjoyed writing in general, and I always knew I wanted to do something with writing, but I never pursued it. My degree is in speech therapy. And looking back, there are times that I found on my computer, for example, poems that I've written over the years, or we actually found this video from when I was 11 and I was sharing a poem at a family reunion. I was like, oh, who knew? But it wasn't something I'd ever thought about pursuing. It was just a very random thing. And actually, I said 2023, but it was 2022. But yeah, so no, it wasn't on my agenda. And I think it really, for me, that speaks to the power of serendipity and just kind of trusting that I always knew I wanted to write in some way. And this has given me a really fun, creative way to pursue writing in a way that I couldn't have planned out if I had tried.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that a lot of us can resonate with, just feeling like pulled towards something and
Mhm.
maybe not really having a reason why, but do we really need a reason why? Maybe not.
Yeah. I don't think so, because it's so much can come of something that you have no expectations for. And I think it's almost more magical when it happens that way. If I had had in my head, oh, I want to be some famous spoken word poet, it wouldn't have unfolded the way that it did, I don't think. And I still don't really have an agenda for it. I'm just sharing my poems at open mics, and if people like them, great. I share them online. If people like them, great. And of course, I want my words to reach anyone that they can help, but it's not like a checklist. How many followers do I have type of energy for me
Yeah,
anyway.
I think that's kind of for most people the best way to do it. Or even if you are someone listening who has you do have in your mind a big kind of I'm like living this way all the time, or this is my main source
Mhm.
of income, or I'm having like I'm on the biggest stage, or whatever else. Sometimes we have that image in our mind and we know in our heart that it's true. You still kind of have to have a little bit of what you're saying, of a little bit of detachment. And
Mhm.
I'm actually just going to keep sharing for fun. Even if I
Mhm.
know that that's where I'm going, I'm still going to live now and share for fun right now, I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I guess for you, it's kind of a coming together because spoken word, you're still speaking on stage. I've always been a huge fan of spoken word. I don't know what it is. It's like has a way of it's like music, but not like it's got this
Mhm.
some kind of I've always find this really empowering energy whenever I go to like a spoken word event. I don't know if that's a common thing or if that's just me.
Yeah. Oh, I think it is because I actually I read that poetry has a physical it creates a physical reaction in our bodies when we listen to it because it is musical and it does put our bodies in a heightened state of arousal, of emotional arousal in a good way. And so it can be very powerful. I don't know exactly the science behind it, but something about the rhyme and the rhythm and just having a cadence, and not all spoken word poetry rhymes, but there is something very captivating about it, I think. And that's why I started writing it because I was so impacted by that event I went to. And so, yes, it does coincide very well with the public speaking training and the voice work and all of that. So I've been very fortunate to kind of stumble on something that, again, I wouldn't have planned for myself, but now it's my greatest passion is doing spoken word poetry.
Yeah, or life will sometimes just bring you somewhere and then you'll be like, oh, this is where I was meant to be all the time. And
Mhm.
it comes without that feeling of forcing.
Yeah.
I would love to kind of dive into that transition from being somebody who taught other people how to speak on stage to somebody that started speaking on stage herself. Can you remember what that transition was like?
Yeah, so when I first started coaching, I was in my mid 20s, and so I was living in New York City, and a lot of my clients were executives, and I would get so nervous working with them. Like, who am I to help this 45-year-old senior executive at a firm? And so I would get so nervous even just one-on-one. And occasionally I would teach small group classes and occasionally I would teach seminars, but I would still get very nervous. It really wasn't until I started doing open mics for poetry that I was able to really practice what I've been preaching for so long about the confidence and about the public speaking itself. And now I recommend it to all my clients. So if you have a fear of public speaking, go find an open mic because one, most of the people at open mics are there to perform themselves. So they're in their own head thinking about their own performance. Especially when I first started out, when I'd go to an open mic, I wouldn't hear anyone else. I would be practicing my poem in my head before I went up, and then after I went up, I'd be reflecting on how I did. And I know that sounds incredibly self-centered, but most of us are. And so if you go to an open mic where people are nervous, it takes a lot of pressure off. And two, that is exactly the sort of environment that is designed to be encouraging and designed to be supportive. And so if you go to an open mic, even if you quote unquote bomb, people will still love you and give you positive feedback for it. And actually, so that's how I built my confidence as a public speaker myself. And so a funny story. I started doing that when I was living in Savannah, Georgia. And then when my mom was officially put on hospice, I moved to Panama City Beach, Florida, which is where my parents live and it's where I grew up. But it's a very small beach town. And I really didn't have many expectations. It was like, okay, I'm just here to be with my family. But something really cool that came of it is I found this amazing writers group, and their open mics were nothing like what I'd experienced in Savannah. In Savannah, I was going to these like tiny coffee shops with maybe 10 people there, and everyone's nervous. The writers group I found here, the first open mic I went to, there were 50 people, and people paid like $30 for tickets. Not everyone was performing, only 10 people performed, and the other people just paid to watch storytellers. It's a storytelling group. And so there were published authors sharing their writing and doing Q&A. There were people just getting up and telling a story. There were a handful of poets. And so my first night going there, it was pretty intimidating. And halfway through my poem, I totally spaced on my line because I like to perform from memory and I just completely blanked. And I just stood there looking at everyone and I said, I'm so sorry, I forgot my next line. And they were so supportive. They were all cheering me on. They were like, just start from the top. It'll come to you. So I started the poem from the beginning and I got to the same spot and I forgot it again. And this one woman, she was like, I'm not leaving without hearing the rest of your poem. And so I said, well, it's on my phone in my purse in the very back of the venue. And so she ran to the back of the room, grabbed my purse, brought it up. I saw my phone, saw the next word, and finished it. And it was fine, and I survived. But what it taught me was the power of that support and encouragement. And it was kind of the worst case scenario. And I was like, if that happened to me at an open mic in front of 50 people and I survived, then I can do open mics or any kind of public speaking and be fine. And that's happened to me one time since then too, but it's just about how you play it off. But the majority of the time, it's fine. I survive. And I didn't die and nobody died. And if anything, they remember me for handling it calmly as opposed to freaking out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of an element in that scenario anyway of like Brene Brown talks about being in the arena. It's
Mhm.
like people who are in the arena, especially when you were doing the earlier ones when everyone else there was just the poet as well. Everyone there, even if they're a bit ahead of you and maybe more experienced, they know what it's like to be that person that's their first ever open mic and they're scared, excuse my French, shitless.
Mhm.
And they know what it's like to be like that. So they will be really supportive because they have that empathy. And I think also it's really important to whatever your creative channel is, whether you're a writer, whether you're a designer, like my background's fashion design, whether you're an artist, whether you're a painter, whether you're a musician or anything, is to sometimes be in the room with the people that are doing the same thing because then they have that empathy for where you are at. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's just a cool, supportive, fun environment most of the time. I mean, there's always going to be someone who's not paying attention or doesn't like it so much or doesn't say something nice. But for the most part, I feel like people are there to lift you up.
Yeah, definitely. I think also, like you said at the end there about kind of, well, the worst has now happened. So here we are, we're gonna keep going, like I also teach yoga. So I've taught yoga to now groups of hundreds of people at the same time, and it's been fine. I've been like not afraid or anything. But the amount of times I've said something in a yoga class of 50 people or more that made absolutely no sense, or just said something really random. Like I said the other day I was teaching a class, I said something like, bring your left knee to your left nose. Like, yeah, like you have a left nose and a right nose. Uh, but people, I think, actually warm to you a lot more when you do say something wrong sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it shows our humanity and it makes us real. I think when we're trying so hard to be perfect or performative, people may admire us, but they're not necessarily going to like us as much as when you do something like that and say your left nose or you forget your lines or whatever. It shows our humanity.
Yeah, and of course, when you do want to kind of give a polished performance and kind of give all that you can do, but I think sometimes having a little bit of distortion or a little bit not going exactly as it is in your head can bring a warmth that does help to connect people. And I think that that goes with anything, any kind of thing that you're doing, whether that is you do a painting and there's like a really slight defect, or you share a post on Instagram or TikTok or whatever channel that you use, and it's not perfectly edited and cut. Often, then
Mhm.
people actually they do kind of connect sometimes better.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
And kind of through those experiences, is that what kind of drew you then from that into focusing your energy towards confidence coaching?
Yeah, well, so public speaking is great. And I also teach voice enhancement and accent modification. I mostly right now work with a lot of corporate professionals. But when I started going to these bigger open mics and meeting so many creative people, my real passion is when I get to have a session with someone who is like you or like I was, very shy, very introverted, but has so much to offer and so many ideas and so many big dreams, but doesn't know how to get out of their own way. And a lot of times we can have those conversations in a speech session, but it also, I don't want to be limited to the speech aspect because I don't care if you say, which is a big part of the training, for example. But I really want to, and I'm starting to focus more now on the overall confidence piece because that is one, what's most fulfilling for me to have those deeper conversations around the blocks and the limiting beliefs and helping people get out of their own way. And I think it translates to every facet of life beyond just speaking. And a lot of times people don't realize that's necessarily what they need. And so what's been really fun is when I work with someone who comes in through the corporate world and then goes on to pursue their creative dreams because of something we did together. And so to focus my efforts more on the people who have these creative passions and how to bring those to the world, that just feels a little more fulfilling for me than helping accountants give polished presentations, which is fine, but
I
different.
feel that. Yeah, yeah, no, I think the audience will resonate for sure. Something that a lot of people that I meet through what I do with the podcast and what I do with my kind of coaching with creatives, something that they struggle with is not always confidence in their work when there's somebody that's already, you have that feeling inside you that this is what I'm meant to do, kind of like you with your poetry. But what they do struggle with is conviction in terms of their message or with sharing it with people. Is that something that
Mhm.
you've ever struggled with, or is it something that you maybe have a couple of tips that you could share for our audience if they're struggling with that now?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I want to help people with because most people know what they're good at. Like, you're if you're good at some art form or creative expression. But it is something that I still struggle with, honestly. Every time I call myself a poet, there's still part of me that's like, what? Or but I think the first step is really owning that part of yourself and not being afraid to acknowledge it. I was always very academic and I was good at school, so I never considered myself a creative until well into my adulthood. And now to call myself a creative person, now it feels liberating, but there were a few years where I was like, is that me? Does that actually describe me? I don't know. I feel like a fraud. So I think the first step is just getting comfortable acknowledging that side of yourself, giving yourself permission to be that and just experiment saying that about yourself, calling yourself that to yourself as well as to other people, and just see what happens. And the more we get comfortable identifying with that side of ourselves, then it's easier to present ourselves with more confidence. The piece that I still struggle with is the selling of the product or the, oh, book me for performances. I'm not so good at the self-promotion. And someone recently, he was like, now isn't that interesting? Because your whole shtick is about helping people increase their confidence in presentation. Like, oh, that's true. I can, if someone invites me to a podcast, for example, I feel like I can explain what I do with a certain level of conviction. But for me to go out of my way to say, hey, everybody, here's what I do, there's still a level of fear there. But I think it's something that we just all have to chip away at slowly and figure out how to do it in a way that works for us, that doesn't feel off-putting, that doesn't feel too in your face to other people. And so I've been kind of grappling with that in my own head of just being okay with self-promotion and knowing that as long as we stay connected to our greater reason why, that I'm not trying to promote my poetry so that I can make $1 million from my poetry. I'm trying to promote it because people tell me the messages are inspirational or that they enjoy listening to it or that they feel something. And so for me, what I find helpful is constantly reconnecting with the purpose behind why we're creating the art and how our art can potentially help someone else, because it can, no matter what art form you do, no matter what creative venture you do, no matter what it is you do, it likely can help other people. And if you stay connected to that vision as to why, then I think it makes it less about ourselves. It's less about you promoting yourself and more about helping the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I kind of guide people towards in a sense as well. That like people need whatever your message is, people need to feel seen. You're not selling yourself, you're giving people an opportunity to feel seen by you through whatever it is that you create. It's like
Mm,
that's the connection piece. It's like people will see themselves in something that you've done, like a painting, a poem, a song. I mean, how many of us have heard a song at some point in our lives, like a really bad breakup or something, and you're like, oh my God, it's like in my head, you know? And I
yeah.
think that that's like what a lot of art can be, or what a lot of theatre can be, or a lot of whatever creative channel it is, whatever art you're creating is here for connection, really. And that's the kind of thing that I think we're quote unquote selling. And that's something that we all struggle with, I think, because we all get a little bit icked out by selling ourselves because it does feel a little bit like, I don't know. I don't really know how to describe that, honestly. It can feel big-headed, or or we can have this narrative in our mind that, you know, to try and sell yourself is a bit smug, or that you're this kind of person that if you do that, or as you say, who am I to think that I should put myself forward to that thing? But actually, as you say, if you connect to the bigger message, it's just like, well, actually, it's just giving more people a chance to connect with that message.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny because you can know all that at a conscious level, and then subconsciously it still feels like icky to some degree. But I really love what you just shared about how the art that we put out helps other people see themselves. I just had someone comment on a YouTube video this morning, actually, that I posted, and it was a very disorganized video. And I was like, I'm just talking stream of consciousness here. Doesn't follow any of the rules of YouTube of like have a call to action and da da da. And the comment was that it said, I like when you're vulnerable like this because it's a mirror for my own emotions and it helps me think about my own emotions. And I was like, great. So I just love that you said that because I think the more we can remember that and make it less about ourselves in general. I think the problem is when we think it's all about us. It's not really about us at all.
No.
But it's about getting over ourselves and getting out of our own way so that we can connect with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I say this a lot, but I'll say it again, just so people get it really stuck in there. But when you're creating something, when you're making something, like, yeah, it is about you. It's about your
Mhm.
experience. It's about some situation that you've been in, something you've been through. It's your way of processing an emotion, or it's just your taste. So there's something that you like you think it's cool, right? But when it's finished, it's no longer yours, not yours
Mm-hmm.
anymore. It's like having a baby. It's like it goes on to live its own life. It kind of goes on and lives its own little, like some people will receive what you've created and it won't be in the way that you intended. Like they might hear a word that you say if it's not something that's really literal, and it will mean something totally different to them, but
Mm-hmm.
they'll still resonate. Is that wrong? Like, no,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I love that idea. I just wrote that down. It's not yours anymore. I think a big fear, though, that at least I have, and I think a lot of creative people have, is what if they misinterpret these words? So I was really hesitant to publish a book because I mostly do spoken word, and people say part of what they enjoy about my poetry is my performance of it and the delivery. And I thought, well, if I put it in a book, they're going to read the words however they want to, and they might not get the cadence, quote unquote, right or how I intended. But that's just something I think we have to let go of and to know that every person who reads something we write is going to interpret it slightly differently, and that's okay. And I really like that framing that you just offered of it's not ours anymore. It's not my poem. It's just a poem that started with me, but now it's the world's, and people can interpret it however they need to, and really they'll get the message they're supposed to get from it.
Yeah, I mean, we interpret things through the lens of our own experience. Like we
Mhm.
interpret things through the wiring of our nervous system, through situations that we're going through at that time, or like the way that we've been brought up through life. So somebody might read it and read it in exactly the way that you would say it, but someone else might read it, especially when something's quite open to interpretation. And I think a lot of poetry is, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of poetry is then but it will mean something different, but it will still mean something to them.
Yeah.
And that's
And
still quite magical, I think.
it's so magical. And the coolest thing that I did not expect this to happen is since I published the book, people will occasionally send me messages and tell me what they got out of the poem, which wasn't even my intention, but it'll be some really cool, interesting interpretation that I wouldn't have thought of. And so it's like, oh, okay, great. I'm glad that that's what you got from it. And so when we're not so stuck to, or we're not clinging so hard to this is what it is, this is how it has to be interpreted, we open the door for different interpretations that, like I said, I wouldn't have thought of. And it's like, oh, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's quite cool. It kind of like the creation continues in
Mm.
some way. I'd love to kind of know, I've had a few people on the podcast that have published books. Was your book self-published or did you get a publisher?
I self-published.
And what
So
was
I
that
used,
like?
it was a lot easier than I expected and also a bit tedious, but I had the book basically compiled on my computer, which for poetry, it's not so complicated because I had all the poems and I put them together. I did write some little blurbs between the poems to describe the inspiration and all of that. But it was sitting on my computer for probably 8 months or so until I went to an open mic and someone was like, "When are you publishing a book?" And I said, "Oh, well, I've got it on my computer. I just need to do it." And he just looked at me and he's like, "So why haven't you done it?" And I felt so stupid in that moment. And so, for anyone listening that has a book they want to publish or a project they want to do, and you've got all the pieces sorted out, and it's just the logistics holding you back, my question to you is, why haven't you done it? And literally the next day, I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to self-publish on Amazon. And it was surprisingly simple. It was tedious because I had to reformat the document a million times because that comes with poetry and the spacing, and I had to make sure the sizing was right for the book. And then the cover kept getting rejected because of the bleed and all this technical logistical stuff. But the heavy lifting I'd already done. And I think the heavy lifting of creating the art is what most creative people, probably your listeners, really enjoy. And so you've got that. And if it's just the logistics holding you back, it's not going to be as intense. It might be annoying, it might be frustrating, but it's definitely doable. And self-publishing on Amazon, I will say, was I literally did it on Microsoft Word. I uploaded a Word document, and then a few days later, my book was published. And I was talking to a friend who was struggling with that. She's like, "Oh, I'm just so overwhelmed by the technicality of it." So she hired someone from Fiverr to design her book, and it's done. So it doesn't have to be as hard as I think, sometimes convince ourselves it will be.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably everyone listening will resonate to having that. I've got loads of stuff on my laptop, or I've got loads of paintings in my wardrobe or in my garage or whatever. They're just not
Mhm.
seeing the light of day, and I've kind of put it all together, but then mm, got stuck at something. It could be at the sharing of it, or at the how do I actually, like, the overwhelm of thinking of how hard something like that could be. But I
Mhm.
think often stuff isn't as hard as your mind will make it seem, even like the technical stuff if you're not a techie person.
Yeah, and we live in a time where it's all literally at our fingertips. And sometimes that overwhelms me because I think I should be doing this and this and this and this and this because I have no excuse because it's all on the computer. But I think when we use it in an empowering way, I don't typically watch YouTube videos for how to do stuff, but when I was self-publishing, I did, and it was like, oh my gosh, in 5 minutes, I just learned how to format my Word doc specifically for self-publishing. Oh, I just learned how to design a cover on Canva specifically to fit this template. And so we have so many resources available to us that if you just dedicate a few hours or give yourself a chunk of time each day and just chip away at it, before you know it, it will be done. Like, I didn't necessarily sit down with the intention of putting a book together. I just started putting all my poems in a document. And then I was like, oh, look, that's enough for a book. Here we go. You do it step by
Yeah.
step.
Awesome. What's it been like kind of since it's been out, to share it with the world in that kind of like digestible way for other people to sit and read at their own pace? What's that kind of been like to see?
Yeah, it was interesting because since I had written it and then gone so long without touching it and then was focused on all the logistics, when it actually was published, I then had to sit with, oh wait, I just put a lot of really personal, vulnerable stuff out, and now my friends are reading this, and now people are sending me comments, and I kind of had to sit with the discomfort of the exposure, which I think we feel in the beginning, and I think that's a limitation to putting things out there. I was like, oh, what if people don't like it? Da, da, da. But I'd kind of forgotten about all of that until it was actually out in the world. But I think when someone says something nice, just like one nice comment, it's like, oh my gosh, this was so worth it. This is why I did this. And so I need to get better at marketing. That goes back to the whole self-promotion piece. I'm not going to say I should do more, but I one of my goals is to promote it a little bit more. But I do occasionally do book signings at local bookstores, and I'll do live poetry performances and at open mics. I'll share my poems, and then people will often buy the book after that. So it's just been really fun to have something tangible to give people. And that feels really good. So in the past, I'd be at an open mic and people would say, where's the book? I want more from you. And I'd say, oh, follow me on Instagram. But not everyone has Instagram, and a lot of these people at open mics are a little bit older and not necessarily using social media. And so it feels really fun to say, here's a tangible thing that you can take home with you. And and in that sense, I haven't even really had to sell it when I'm at events like that. People just want it, and that's been really, really fun.
Yeah, well, that's such a nice way to actually promote it because a lot of us struggle with the doing the social media and stuff.
Hmm.
Definitely have days of that, and I think a lot of us do. But to have kind of a space where you're doing it old school and
Hmm.
in front of real people is also the kind sometimes the most powerful. But I think a lot of people will really resonate with that feeling of having something ready and then being ready to put it out there and realizing like, oh my God, I put something super personal in there because often what we create is really personal. And then in that moment, it can feel like you're walking around naked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, what are
um,
people going to think of me? But
yeah, what a good, well, like you think of, or like really seeing into the depths of an emotion that you went through, maybe you didn't even speak to them about if you were there, someone close to you, right?
hmm yeah. But the majority of the comments that I've gotten have been positive. And because here's another thing just to put out in the world. Most people that are consuming your art aren't going to go out of their way to tell you that it's terrible. And if they do, something that having a YouTube channel, I realize some people are just going to say mean things no matter what. And I've learned to remind myself that that is about them. If they are actively choosing to spend their time watching things they don't like and leaving negative comments about it, that is their decision. That has nothing to do with me. You're not forcing anyone to look at your art. You're not forcing anyone to buy your product. And so if they decide to do it and they don't like it, that's ultimately on them. But also, I would just say most people, I think, want to support people. And some people have bought my book simply because they're like, I admire you sitting here at this bookstore selling your book. I don't even read poetry, but I'm going to buy one to support you because it's very inspiring. So just remember that you doing the thing that you know you're meant to do is going to inspire someone else. And that's it's really been the greatest takeaway from publishing my book is how many people have gone on to do their own because they said, well, you did it. And that's how I did it too, is my friend published hers and I was like, okay, I can do my own. And so it just has a really nice ripple effect.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think a lot of the time, most people are cheering you on. We'll just always fixate on that one comment. I remember
Mhm.
actually the first time I ever got like a negative comment, like on the internet anyway. And that was on Insight Timer, the Insight Timer app, which is the meditation app. I have meditations on there, I have courses on there and stuff like that. And the first like 1 star negative comment I ever got on there made me laugh so much that I've never feared a negative comment before because I said something like, um, nice meditation, shame about the accent. And
What?
I was like, well, I just commented, well, I'm sorry, I'm English, can't really help that. But glad you like the meditation, it was just so out of this world ridiculous. I was like, okay, well, these people are just they just want to have something mean to say, so they're going to find anything.
Yeah. But again, it's like if they don't like your accent, they don't have to listen to your meditation. There's an infinite number of meditations on the internet that they can go
Yeah,
find.
exactly.
So that is 100% on them. So anyway, that's also just a bizarre comment. But
Yeah, but like there's people that are always going to say something, and you have to get to a point, I think, where you realize that actually they're not, especially if it's about an art piece that you've created, like a poem or like a painting or something. Sometimes someone not liking that, we can kind of take it to mean that they don't like us as a human,
hmm
because it's something that was a personal to us, and it's really come from our hearts. We can take it really, really personally, which I think was why the separation at the end of creating something, like now it's no longer mine, it's theirs,
hmm
could really help as well, because then it's like, oh, okay, well, they just don't like that piece. They're not taking a bash at my talent or who I am as a person, how good I am as a human being.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is to not tie it to your self-worth, which I think we do instinctively, but we don't need to do that. So having that separation, I think, is really powerful.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that's an easy thing to do, everyone
Yeah.
listening, but it is something I find really helpful, really, really helpful to do. Well, it's been lovely, lovely having this conversation. I feel like we could chat all day. But I'd like to leave everyone with two questions in particular. The first one kind of comes from this idea that a lot of us, when you're creative or you're on a creative path, sometimes you can feel a little bit like an alien in the world, or maybe a little bit misunderstood sometimes. So this question I find kind of makes everyone feel seen in some way. So what would you say is one common misconception people have about either about you or about the work that you do?
So a common misconception about me, I think a lot of that I'm kind of trying to break down is I think people think I'm very organized and put together and like going for it, and people will say, "Oh, you're doing all these big things." And in my mind, I'm just like scattered. There's clutter all over my desk. I'm just kind of trying to I'm really more of a creative person than I've ever acknowledged. But as far as the work itself, a lot of people assume that I've studied poetry for my whole life. I have not taken a poetry class since maybe middle school or maybe high school. And so people will sometimes throw out these terms like iambic pentameter and da da da. It's like, I don't know any of that. I don't follow the rules. And so a big misconception about writing that I've had this discussion with a lot of other aspiring writers who say, "Oh, I'm not a writer," quote unquote. You don't need training to do any kind of art. You don't need training to be a musician or to write things. And yes, it can be helpful. And if you want to up level, do that. But I find when I did get curious and start looking at some of the rules of poetry, it really limited me. And so I stopped. And so I think a big misconception is that you have to study. Because I don't think you do. You just practice, and what's meant to come out will come out.
Yeah, I love that. That's I definitely 100% agree with that for sure. The second question is if you think back to like moments in your life, maybe a really memorable conversation with a person, who were you speaking to? And then what from that conversation did you take? It could be like a one liner that they said, or maybe a piece of advice that they gave you.
So I always say the best advice I've ever gotten was when I was living in New York City. I really loved my job, but I didn't want to be there anymore. I was getting burnt out. I'm from a small beach town. I was like, this is too much, but I was conflicted because I was really passionate about my job that I was doing and I was helping so many people. And he said to me, learn to be happy no matter where you are. So in this case, it was stay in New York City until you find that personal fulfillment and contentment within yourself, and then decide from a more objective place, is this where you want to be or not? And he has since said to me, like, that wasn't great advice because environment does play a big role in people's personal well-being, but it was so impactful for me because it really forced me to find the happiness within myself instead of saying, if I move cities, then I'll be happy. Because there's the whole like if then thing that just never works. And so when you find that within yourself, it doesn't matter where you live, you can find your peace no matter what.
That's so true. And I really, really agree with that. And I think there it is obviously nuance. There's nuance to everything. Like environment does play a role. But I think when you're moving to different apartments or like you're thinking like you never get to the point where you feel settled and happy, then it's like what's the common denominator here? It
Yeah.
is something, it's me.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I know that was the last question. If we have a few minutes, I would love to share a poem.
Yeah, I would love that.
Just, I didn't really think about this beforehand, but I'm pretty sure I still have this one memorized. And it's just kind of an inspirational message based on everything we've been talking about. Don't let anyone dull your sparkle, especially not yourself, my dear. Try not to be fooled by that voice you hear between your two ears, whispering lies rooted in fear in an attempt to steer you to so-called safety and proposed protection. Its motive isn't wrong, but discern it with discretion. For you aren't doing anyone any favors by depriving us the flavors that make up you and you alone. The best attempt could never clone the essence of your soul. But may it be known that some like it salty, some like it sweet. So don't expect every day of every week to be every person's perfect treat, because you won't. And that's all right. It's in variety that we delight. There's no way to get it right. So whatever you have to offer, show it and own it, please. Don't be a tease whispering to yourself, I've got the most fabulous side of me, but they could never see it. If you know what's inside of you, don't you think it's time to be it? What if that part you're holding back is exactly what we've needed? So try to be generous with your spirit, even when you're feeling shy. Because if there's a glimmer within you, there's got to be a reason why. And letting it shine could illuminate the sky for those of us lost, aimless in the dark. All we need's one flicker with the faintest hint of a spark. And you just never know whose flame you'll set aglow by striking your own match. One ember's bound to catch, making all our vision clearer. So don't let anyone dull your sparkle, dear. Not even the person in the mirror.
I love that. That was so good. Tricia, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, I'll pop the links to find the book and find you and your work and everything in the chat. But if anyone's ready to find you right away, where is the best place that they can come and connect with you?
Yes, so I post all my poetry on Instagram and YouTube, and the handle for both is Powerful and Poised, written out, all spelled out. And powerfulandpoised.com is my website. I do have an online course for confidence building. It's called Show Up Sure, Secrets to Embody Confidence for a Lifetime. There are also some free resources on there. And my book is called Create and Receive, Make and Believe, Finding Peace Through Primarily Positive Poetry, and that is available on Amazon.
Amazing. Well, I hope everyone comes and checks out all the things. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for listening or watching the show. Thank you for being here. As always, if you've enjoyed it, do let us know. You can leave a comment. You can also share it with a friend or share it on socials. If you share it on socials, then obviously tag us both. We'd love to know kind of what you took from it and what inspired you from this little chat. But otherwise, thank you again so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Maverick Mind. I hope that you've loved it, and if you have, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe and write a 5-star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast from. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I invite you to join me over on Instagram at maverickmindco or on my website maverickmind.elliefoden.com. And I'll see you in another podcast very, very soon.